Welcome back to another episode of the Scattered Abroad Joint podcast on the network of Scattered Abroad. I think it's something about you, Chase. Every time you've been on an episode this season, I mess myself up. We're in episode 5. This is Thomas and Matthew Doubt in Devotion. I have Matt McBrayer and Chase Green back with me here, and we're looking forward to getting into our study. We're talking about, as an episodic type theme for this episode, personal transformation in the gospel. But another theme could be also that Jesus calls both the doubter and the despised. And so what can we learn from Thomas about faith and uncertainty?
I'd like to start by saying I'm a little bit more optimistic than perhaps some are when it comes to Thomas. And the reason I say that is I think Thomas is kind of an underrated apostle. Actually, my favorite apostle is probably Paul, probably Peter after that. I really like Thomas up there pretty highly as well. The reason I say that is because a lot of people call him Doubting Thomas, and I get the rationale behind that. I prefer to call him Show Me the Evidence Thomas, because when we get to the end of the gospel account of John, Thomas wanted to see the evidence, but that's John 20 verses 24 and following. But I think Jesus' response there is telling. Jesus didn't condemn Thomas for asking for the evidence. He showed him, and then Thomas acknowledged, "My Lord and my God." And so I really like Thomas. I think maybe sometimes we give him too hard a time. I get it. We need to be careful and make sure that we're not doubting. But at the same time, it's okay to want to see what the evidence is as well.
Yeah, I think we need to find a shorter name than that, though. Show me the evidence, Thomas.
It's a little long.
Evidently, Thomas. How about that?
Is it evidently?
I mean, evidently he was wrong.
Or Apologetics Thomas. I don't know.
AT.
Yeah.
Christian
Somebody
evidence.
Get Apologetics Press on the phone right now.
Christian evidence is Thomas.
CTE. No. Okay, Matt, what do you have on this?
All right, getting us back on track here.
It's Chase's fault.
It's Chase's fault.
It's always my fault.
It's his prowess. You're just very intimidated.
How many
I
bees
get it.
were in the world back when Thomas was alive?
Hang on one second.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. But, I think going along with what Chase said, it is important to realize that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to really look for proof. And then on top of that, I think that with what happens with Jesus even, meets him where he's at. He doesn't go, "No, that's wrong." No, he just meets him where he is, and helps him move along through that. But yeah, the idea though is that we need to grow stronger from these instances, and I think that that's what happens with Thomas here.
Yeah, if you want to call him Doubting Thomas, you could say it's an honest doubt. Honestly, which one of us would have been of the opinion, oh yeah, he's alive, totally? Because Jesus himself didn't condemn Thomas for what he said. Blessed are those who need the evidence, essentially, that's the MCV version, Michael Clark version, and blessed are those who don't need the evidence. It reminds me a lot like how the parables sometimes were talked about in the sense of like, I need to see proof. Well, parables would sometimes reveal hidden truths and also conceal hidden truths. This seems to be a similar mindset of some people will hear it and go, yes, the evidence you have provided me by what I'm reading is enough. That's enough evidence. But there's also tons of evidence that can be physically seen through historical artifacts, historical records, all of that at the time, if Jesus still lived today, I think we'd still have some honest people saying, I want to see proof of this. You're telling me a man died and raised himself from the dead. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that. And I don't think we can be very harsh in saying that he was wrong. I mean, he wanted proof. He found it. John 20, 24 through 29. And there's this idea of Jude 22. On some, have compassion. Jesus did not say to Thomas, how dare you?
Right.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you? He met him where he was at and said, here you go. You want proof? I've got it. Truth has no need to fear an investigation. Jesus wasn't scared of Thomas's doubt. He didn't have anything to fear. He just said, reach in. Touch the holes of where the nails were and reach into my side. Go ahead. Here's the proof you're looking for. And then you see Thomas's realization come to be with, my Lord and my God, this is true. Then yeah, I like what you said there about Doubting Thomas being more of the evidently Thomas.
Inquisitive, maybe.
Inquisitive Thomas.
Thomas.
IT.
Yeah.
I like that one.
A couple of other instances in Thomas's life. John 11, verses 7 through 16. In verse 7 there, Jesus wants to go back to Judea, and the disciples basically try to talk him out of it because there were people wanting to kill Jesus there. Guess who's right there with Jesus, almost like Peter. Peter, I call Peter impetuous Peter because he's always raring to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes he puts his foot in his mouth, I think.
Most
Thomas essentially says here, let us go. This is John 11, verse 7. Let us go also that we may die with him. I think it's toward the end of the passage, but let's go. Let's die along with him. And then John 14, verse 5, Thomas asks the famous question. John 14, Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. If I go to prepare a place for you, I will come and be with you again. In verse 5 of John 14, Thomas says, Lord, we do not know where you're going, and how can we know the way? And then Jesus comes in with that amazing statement in John 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So that tremendously important verse in John 14, verse 6 was in response to a really good question from Thomas.
Right. Well, when we think about Matthew now, Matthew was one, not this Matthew, Matthew that we're talking about in the Bible. I was about to say, Matthew was kind of hated by profession if you think about it. Tax collector. No, most people would not want to see him coming. Even today, most people don't want to see somebody walking up that's a tax collector. And so, not you, Matthew, this Matthew. You're an insurance agent, preacher. So you're kind of like doubly hate. No.
Yeah, that's right.
No, people look to you for guidance.
No respect.
Safety and security, both physically and spiritually. But Matthew's background as a tax collector, how did that make him a surprising addition as an apostle?
Well, I think, just clearly from the thought process of who did he work for? He worked for Rome, and immediately he's just labeled a traitor. I think a lot of times we think about tax collectors, we just automatically think IRS. Well, we wouldn't want to hang out with IRS agents, and I mean, I get that. That's just really not the same thing, because Rome has come and taken captive this land, and they're just subjugated to them. They're paying taxes, and then on top of that, you've got somebody who is a fellow countryman, and he is now in charge of taking up taxes. Mm-hmm. And so it just ends up being just a hated position. I mean, how many times do you see in the scriptures, well, even, thinking about, tax collectors and sinners, they went into the same category for the Jews, the same category. Even, if you talking about choosing to do good, well, what do? Do you do good to people just because they do good to you? Well, even the sinners and publicans, tax collectors, don't they do the same thing? And, that's just one example, but there's several examples where they're lumped into the same category. Yep. And so, I mean, that's the biggest thing right there is that that's kind of surprising that you've got a bunch of Jews, number one, that are there, and then you've got this tax collector. Not only that, you've got Simon the Zealot there, who would have been, militantly trying to get rid of Rome. And therefore, somebody like Matthew is somebody who he would have aggressively, militantly tried to get rid of. And, those men would actually carry around daggers and hide them in their cloaks and walk up to Romans and just in a crowd and, stab them real quick and then walk away without ever being seen. That could have happened to Matthew by someone like Simon the Zealot. Yep. And yet, here they are, they're partnering in the gospel, they're following Jesus, and they're working together.
Most everyday people would have written off Matthew and all the other tax collectors, and they were considered traitors to the Jewish people. I think we need to be careful not to write off Matthew too early. I think of another example of a tax collector in that of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. Luke 19, verse 8. Zacchaeus defends himself. A lot of people were writing him off too. But he defends himself in Luke 19, verse 8. He says, "Look, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor. And if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold." I think there's a couple different ideas that people have on what he meant by that. I take him at his word for it. I think Zacchaeus was the rare example of an honest tax collector. And is it possible that Matthew could have been another rare example of an honest tax collector that wasn't charging exorbitant rates and things like that? So I guess the point is just kind of bringing this to some application as far as when we deal with people.
Sure.
I think back to Samuel and how he was told, the Lord looks at the heart. We need to be careful and look at the heart as well, not the outward appearance. We need to be careful not to write certain people off. There's no way that person's interested in the gospel. That person's not interested. I bet he is. And then we go and actually that person's not interested. The other one would have been interested. We need to be careful not to just make, judgments that we really don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So how do their stories show Christ's ability or power to change lives?
Well, before I get into that, it'll kind of go with this, but I just kind of want to piggyback off what he just said. Chase said something important there. We sometimes we pick and choose who we think is going to obey, and we really don't know. And I remember the biggest thing for me is whenever I was working with a church early on, a person that was having gender dysphoria came in. And it was a woman that was dressed like a man, and, it was clear that they were having some issues. I mean, when they walked in, I didn't even recognize that it was a woman. And it took me a couple of minutes to understand, oh, no, this is a woman here. And so we had a long conversation. I remember she wanted to have a Bible study, and I thought, she's never going to obey. I mean, she's got too many problems. She's not going to obey. And I remember I've done this several times in my life as a preacher where I've said, that's not going to happen. And then I have to eat my words. And I'm so thankful that on that one I had to eat my words because she became a Christian. She was faithful. She ended up getting cancer later on, stayed faithful, died a Christian. And if I had just said, no, I'm not going to waste my time, then, I would have lost out on that opportunity. Maybe even she wouldn't have died a faithful Christian. Hopefully she would have found somebody else, but who knows? But going into that, I think that illustrates the power here of changing lives. We just don't know how far someone is willing to change, like how far they're willing to go in their life and change what they've been doing. And so people will come to Christ, and they will have these backgrounds that are steeped in sin, and just knowing that they can be free from that and that they can come to Christ is just an amazing thing. And that we see this time and again. This is the entirety of the gospel message. You've got all these people, and I love going through the book of Acts and seeing people with different backgrounds obeying the gospel. And that's what we have even today. We've got a bunch of people with different backgrounds obeying the gospel.
Yeah, there's not much to add to that. I'll just say this. We need to preach the gospel and sow the seed, and God's going to give the increase. And so we need to sow the seed, not sparingly, but we need to sow the seed indiscriminately. We need to preach it to everybody, and God's going to be the one that knows the hearts, and He's going to give the increase on the ones that have the hearts that will willingly hear it and obey it.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly glad that you guys were with me today and studying. We're thankful for you. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to be a work of the Memphis School of Preaching, and we know that if you are looking for an opportunity to preach the gospel, this is the school that will help train you. It's trained all of us that are on the network, and we're grateful to give back in some small way by doing the work of Scattered Abroad. We do also want to just make it known as a bit of a housekeeping thing here that we are recording this at Polishing the Pulpit, and so if you are stopping by the booth sometime in the near future at PTP when they're up and running, you can look for us. We'd be happy to see you and say hello. Let you see the setup that we're actually filming on right now at Sevierville. And in Branson, we've got stickers and other things that we'd be happy to give you. If you are making plans to come to the Memphis School of Preaching lectureship, it is something that happens the last Sunday in March all the way through the following Thursday. We'd be happy to have you in attendance. We do have RV hookups, but you have to call the school in advance to make sure that you get those in time. We are studying about scattered disciples, and we have so many different things that we're going to be able to study still this season. But the next time you will see Chase and Matt back together with me will be episode 11, where we'll talk about signs, wonders, and witnesses. Until then, remember the words of Acts 8 and verse 4. Therefore they that were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. May we always remember and continue to scatter the seed together.